Good morning and welcome to the Atlantic Council's Front Page. The Front Page series hosts world leaders, people who are making things happen, and it is my pleasure as well as privilege to introduce today's guest at the Atlantic Council's Front Page, the President of Georgia, Salome Zourabichvili. President Zourabichvili and I have known each other for so many years. I had hair then. And we have known each other through the ups and downs of Georgia's advance from post-Soviet backwater to aspiring European Union member, to victim of Russia's aggression, and now a country where a pro-democracy movement is literally in the streets of the capital and beyond, pushing back against authoritarianism, and in a world where tyrants and aggressors believe their time has come. There's no need for any American to tell any Georgian about Russian aggression. They know because they were attacked and invaded by Russia in 2008. There's a lot to talk about, and you're not here to listen to me. So I will end and offer the floor to President Zourabichvili. And my hopes are, and I have confidence in my hopes, that we will have a productive discussion. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you very much, Dan, for the introduction, and thank you, Madam President, for being here. Welcome to Washington. I would also like to thank the Atlantic Council for hosting this important conversation today. Ambassador John Herbst, and of course, Ambassador Dan Fried for your insightful remarks. Thank you very much for that. And before we start, I'd like to make a very quick housekeeping announcement. This conversation is on the record, of course, and we'll be getting questions online. And to those of you who are watching online, you can send your questions at askac.org. And for those of you who are attending here in the audience, please line up with the microphone right here, and you can ask the questions. We'll have about 15 minutes towards the end for your questions. Yeah. And with that, Madam President, let's start from your visit, which is very important at a very important time in Washington as well. So tell us about some of your meetings. You attended the inauguration yesterday. What are your impressions? How do you feel about this trip?
Well, first of all, before the inauguration, I was lucky to attend some of the pre-inaugural receptions that are taking place in this town, and at that occasion, I was introduced to a number of the cabinet ministers that are not yet confirmed by the Senate, but those were the first contacts. So basically, as it always happens in those initial contacts, I was introduced, and I could just forward my essential message to them, which is that Georgia needs today, more than ever, the attention of its American friends, because the situation there is crucial. We are really at a turning point of being dragged back to Russia, or continuing on the path which has been the path of Georgia since its independence, and the path on which the American role has been essential in creating, consolidating our institutions, our army, and in general the independence of the country. So that is what the Georgian population wants today, as it wanted yesterday, and as it wants for its future. And that's what I think should be known by the people that come in the administration, because in Georgia it's not only a political question, not only, although it's very important, not only a question of human rights and repressions, it's really an existential question whether Georgia will be allowed to continue its path, independent country, a country that wants to have its sovereignty recognized and its Euro-Atlantic path supported.
Yeah. You mentioned that Georgia is a pro-Western country. Georgian, there is this connection.
Is a Western country.
Western country, yes.
More than
better.
pro.
And yesterday we saw, it was a very nice manifestation of that when we saw the American flags flown together with the Georgian and the European EU flags at the continued demonstration yesterday, in a way to celebrate or to show support for the inauguration day in Washington.
And to say, here we are.
Yes, and yes, to say here we are. What are your expectations, or how do you hope the new U.S. administration will help Georgia's this democratic path? And we'll get into other things, but at this point, democracy.
I think that, first of all, the policy of the United States towards Georgia has always been a bipartisan policy. And the steps that we have seen recently of sanctions, which have already had their effect. We can see in the reactions of certain circles in Georgia, despite the narrative that nothing is happening and it doesn't matter, we can see that it matters. So this is one, the Megobari Act that was reintroduced by Congressman Wilson, was one of the initiators, is very important because it shows both directions. It shows that if we want to be isolated, that those are the risks of isolation. And if we come back to our original path, Euro-Atlantic path, then there can be measures taken that will very quickly bring us back to the partnership with the United States, to the strategic partnership, to the economic ties and links and development of those economic links, and to political deepening of our relations. So I think that this dual, I would say, policy is very important, as it is written into the Megobari Act. The non-recognition is extremely important because I don't think that the United States can accept a country as a friend and as a partner which has no longer any of the institutions that the United States has supported over the years. No independent institution, no respect for the Constitution, rigged elections. I don't see any American government that can accept as a friend and partner a country like that is playing friend with sometimes the Chinese, sometimes Iran, sometimes some of the terrorist groups, has no principles.
Based on your meetings here, do you get that sense? Are you optimistic that that's exactly what?
I cannot say. I would be exaggerating if I would draw any conclusion from what were not really meetings, were more social encounters. And I don't like to pretend that it's more than that. I hope to have a number of meetings starting today. I'm meeting at the Congress Senator Shaheen and Rich.
Yes.
And I think that those people are going to be, as they were before, but they're going to be very influential as dealing with Georgia. And I'm expecting other meetings during the 2 more days when we're going to be here. But I've been listening to President Trump's 2 speeches because I was in the second room, and that was very interesting. And I think that the America that he is describing and the foreign policy of America that he is describing as a strong America, America that is effective and is active in action, that is the America that certainly Georgia needs, because we cannot just have words, we need action in today's situation in Georgia.
And that is probably Georgia that America needs as well, especially based on some of the comments or the speeches that President Trump made yesterday.
Certainly, because we are at a place where geopolitical interests of the big powers are at play. We know Russia and Russia's interests. China is very present and intends to take advantage of the fact that the leadership is trying to establish good relations. So at stake is the port of Anaklia, which was of interest to the United States, to Trump himself, I think, if I'm not mistaken. It's the Black Sea which is at stake, and that's very important because one of the objectives of the Russian aggression towards Ukraine by Russia was the Black Sea, not only the territory of Ukraine, but the Black Sea.
Well.
And if one also looks at the strategy, the hybrid strategy that Russia is implementing towards Georgia in the elections, towards Romania, towards Moldova, it shows very clearly that the Black Sea is very central in the strategy of Russia. So I think that it means also that it's central for the strategy of the United States and the possibility to use for the American fleet the Black Sea and not be thrown out. That would not be a strong America.
Yes. Let's move to talk about Russia in a minute or so. But before that, before we move on to that, you've been talking to the European leaders as well, very actively. What's the sense that you're getting from them, and what do you think, how do you assess the support that you've been getting and Georgian people have been getting from the EU leaders, and what else do you expect, if anything?
Well, the support has been there in a bit passive way, which is non-recognition, and that is very important because that shows that this regime cannot get away with business as usual, which is something they were planning on with the Europeans, as they were planning on some form of readaptation here with the Trump administration. In both cases, the business as usual doesn't work, will not work. But that's not enough as support, and that's what I've been telling the Europeans. We need more. We need more active defense of the people that are being arrested, that have been, for some of them, tortured, and reactions toward the repressions, the very varied forms of repression that the regime is now using to try to really crush this protest movement without any success. But they are inventing new forms every day. So I think that we there need a bit more clear positions, especially from the European Commission and the new structure of the European, the Council of the European Union. So that's another place where I need to go again to make my point. And I will be in the Wehrkunde in Munich early February, and that will be probably the occasion to meet a number of European leaders and tell them that they need to do more because the Georgian population is really looking at their partners. They're seeing that the leadership is taking Georgia towards isolation and towards other partners that are not our usual friends and are probably not friends at all. And they need to know, the people in Georgia need to know that our traditional partners, Americans and Europeans, are on the side, see them, and we all know, and they know, that the outcome of the crisis is in our hands. It won't be decided from outside, but we need to be seen and supported, morally at least.
Yeah. And let's move to Russia, China, and Iran now. Georgian Dream has very visibly pivoted, especially in the past couple of years, away from the West and closer to Russia and China, Iran, of course, to America's expense,
Yeah.
I should say. So if you would please explain that to the audience. Like, what are we talking about when we're talking about Iran or China? What is the Georgian Dream doing?
It's a geopolitical play by people that do not understand geopolitics, but think they can get away with playing with people they don't know really. And they think that they can find a compensation, whether it's economic with China, whether it's political support with Russia, whether it's regional influence with Iran, and to the point that they accept to sit next to terrorist groups. That was the case of the prime minister that didn't even realize what he was doing. I think, which shows the extent of. I don't think it was a planned move, but at the same time, they never excused themselves or they never regretted the move because they think that they can find alternatives to the traditional partners of Georgia to support their dictatorship. And that's a big mistake because you can never replace and find an alternative, a serious alternative for your friends and partners of over 30 years and much more, in fact, because the others are going to exploit your weaknesses, and they have plenty of weaknesses to be exploited. So Russia will exploit it for its own sake and for its influence and for, in a way, finding a revenge to the war that it cannot win in Ukraine. China is going to exploit it for its economic aims, and that is anaclia and contracts that are non-transparent, that are always very heavy contracts, I would say, for the country. I mean, the African countries know how China is operating. Even Poland knows how China is operating. And what to say about Iran and the terrorist group. And what Georgia has nothing to gain. They are the only ones, personally, to think that they can maybe survive for some time with those type of supports.
Yeah. And if I just could add to that, Georgia signed a strategic partnership with China 2023. And the trips that you're referring to were the trips of...
Which is very interesting, that partnership, because the text of the partnership has a paragraph in which Georgia recognizes one China, and China recognizes the principle of territorial sovereignty and integrity for the whole world, but not specifically the territorial integrity of Georgia. That's a very clear signal of how China understands and how it uses and exploits the weaknesses of a government. By the way, this strategic partnership was not shown to the parliament before, so it's anti-constitutional. It was taken by the prime minister directly to China, and nobody else had seen it before it was signed. I'm not sure even if the prime minister had seen it before.
That's very interesting. And the trips to Iran that you're referring to were once for the funeral of
That's
the
right.
late president, and then inauguration of the new president 2 months after that. So you're saying that that was not thought out?
Well, frankly, I don't know, because I don't have that type of contacts where they would tell me either in advance or explain what they're doing. But they're clearly trying to exist with those contacts. It's also clear recently that the trips to Azerbaijan are happening every other week, but not for the good reasons, because Azerbaijan is a very important partner of Georgia, and it's very right to have a very close relationship. But we should know what it is for, what are the decisions, and it should not be just an alternative to not being able to travel or to visit or to be received anywhere, and just alternate between Armenia, Azerbaijan, and pretty maybe Russia.
You think so?
Well, there's some rumors that could lead. Mr. Lavrov has been repeating his invitation, but with more forcefully of the 3+3 format, which is a format that excludes all our partners from the region and keeps the region under the control of Iran, Russia.
Yes. Let's talk about Russia then, now that you brought up 3+3. So it's basically to establish some sort of control over the region, basically between Turkey, Iran, Russia, and on the other side, Armenia.
Well, Russia is trying to recuperate its positions in the region, which it has been losing very clearly, not only in Georgia. And I think that Russia increased its pressures on, I don't know what are the links exactly, but on the Mr. Ivanishvili and the rest of the leadership increased its pressure once it realized that the European path, thanks to Ukraine and to the acceleration of this European path, was very real and could have results quite fast. And that's how they read the status of candidate that was granted to Georgia. And if one reads the speeches of Mr. Ivanishvili and the others, they start after that to become even more aggressive, which was already started before, but more aggressive towards our American partners, our European partners, in a way that a rhetoric that is very appreciated by Moscow and is very similar to the rhetoric of Moscow.
What do you think, maybe it's an obvious response, but I still want to ask you, what do you think Russia's end goal in Georgia is? And how does that look?
I think we are close to the end goal. They have a government at their devotion, which they can control, which does and talks the way Russians talk, treat the European American partners the way Putin does, and do not have any aspiration or attempt to independence. Doesn't cost them anything. So that's quite comfortable. At a time when, as I was saying, the region was moving out very quickly out of the influence of Russia, so Georgia per se, and that was a long path but accelerated, but Armenia. And everybody knows that the success of the European path of Armenia goes through Georgia. And they're watching with lots of interest what's happening. Azerbaijan also, the closeness between Azerbaijan and Turkey in the recent years is also a way of moving away from Russia in a very different manner and in its own oriental form, which is more ambivalent sometimes or not that direct. But also that meant that Russia was really losing the whole of the region. And then you have the Black Sea with all the projects between the European Union and the Caucasus, the connectivity projects, really very big projects, infrastructural, that were also linking to Central Asia, where also there are some signs of trying to establish closer relations with the Western world, especially after Russia has been sanctioned and in a way isolated. So all of that was something that Russia does not look at with very favorable eyes and is trying to do everything to limit that. But one cannot say that Russia is very successful these years, certainly not in Ukraine. Everything that has happened in Ukraine is a big disaster for Russia. It might not be a military victory for Ukraine, but what we have seen is that Russia is not able in 2.5 years to win what it was supposed to win in 3 days, if we remember well. Has changed many times its military staff and military leaders, so they are not performing. Have now to bring North Korean to fight, and they are not at the end of their problems, because once there is some form of peace that is reached, that will mean once the return of these soldiers, which is a very big social problem for Russia, and the non-return of the 1 million soldiers which they have not declared to their families.
So we'll see the continuation of that, and also how that may impact Georgia. Now I want to come back to the Georgian Dream and this narrative that the Georgian Dream built in the society, especially in the pre-election period, that Georgian Dream was the guarantor of stability in Georgia, that the West was trying to get Georgia open the second front for Russia. What do you make of that? And do you think they were successful in pushing this narrative?
They were partly successful, because in any country, if you use the fear of war, and especially in a country and in all of the countries that are around Russia, they all know that you can never say never, and we have all experienced, not once, not only 2008, but 1991, 1992, and before that, 1801 and 1921. So plenty of experiences of what it means to be neighboring Russia. So of course, saying that we might be dragged into a war, especially when you look at the pictures, and that we know that we are nowhere close to Ukraine in terms of human resources, territorial depths that allow you, military resources. So Georgia is a very small country that cannot do what Ukrainians are so bravely doing for their own country. So of course, to a certain point, it works. But in a way, it's a very Russian propaganda, and it has worked, and that's very interesting. When these elections were rigged and stolen by many different forms, and we're not going to go into those details, but it was a very sophisticated operation. It serves also to explain the supposed success of the Georgian Dream, because if that's not the case, then how come 12 years after coming to power, how come they get more votes when everything shows the mass demonstrations in 2022 and 2023 show that the people are very upset about a number of things that this government has been doing. So the only explanation, inside as outside, is to say, well, it's because the propaganda on war has worked. Yeah. And it also gives some form of self-explanation to the people that are supporting the Georgian Dream, doesn't want to admit to themselves that they are supporting a government that's moving towards Russia. So they say, well, no, but I don't want the war in Georgia. Mm-hmm. Well, the result now is that we have a government and a regime that has declared war, not only on our partners, political war, but on its own population. And what we're seeing today in the streets of Tbilisi is a very peaceful population, 55 days yesterday, extremely peaceful, because there is no store that has been destroyed, no car burnt. I have seen demonstrations in France, a number of them, so I know what it means to have peaceful demonstrations. And the repression is very harsh, very selective, using Russian forms, Russian methods. We have cameras all over. I've counted them. There are 150 cameras around the parliament.
150 cameras, yes.
So they take pictures of the people, and then they go and get them in their home or on side streets or elsewhere. So it's an attempt to a very repressive regime, but it doesn't seem to be working. It doesn't seem to be frightening the...
It seems like 56 days today, or 55. To remind the audience, the demonstrations, massive demonstrations, started on November 28th, when the Georgian Dream chairman, Irakli Kobakhidze, said that his government is stopping EU integration for 4 years, even though they've tried to take it back, but the initial statement was that. What do you make of it?
Not taking back, really. They're just saying that it's not exactly what we have said.
What we meant, yes.
But that's the way our European partners have understood, and that everything, it's not only one declaration. That declaration is the sealing act of what they have been doing over the past 2 years, of really getting away from our European friends, not putting in effect any of the recommendations that were presented. On the contrary, renegating on some of the implemented recommendations, like that on the gender quotas. So it's really, but this statement, which was not needed in any way.
That's what I wanted to ask you. Why do you think you made the statement? A month after the
I think it's a miscalculation, and there are many miscalculations. I think that they saw that the protests after the elections, after the elections, on the rigging of the elections, did not last. And they thought that they could provoke a new movement and that crash it and finish everything before the end of the year. Yeah. But that was the one too much. People were maybe tired by what had happened during the year with these mass protests against the Russian law. They were really psychologically defeated by the rigging of the elections, because everybody after these mass protests was convinced, myself included, that the victory was sure if people were to mobilize themselves. And the result was so unpredicted that people were really depressed, and that's what explains that these protests right after the elections were not that substantial as we had seen in the months before. But then they tried to have the upper hand and to continue to push it. And
it seems like more they push.
When it touches the essence, I think that people are more ready in Georgia to accept social difficulties. They have shown that they accept, but even political realities like rigging the elections and they stay in power and things like that. But if it touches the really existential issue, whether it's Russia, independence, freedom, then there is no
European future. Well, let me ask you about your role now. On December 29th, the Georgian Dream inaugurated Georgian Dream president, one party.
A dream president.
And you left the presidential palace that day. In your statement at the presidential palace, you said that you will take the legitimacy and the Georgian flag everywhere you go. How do you, first of all, what did you mean by that? And then how do you navigate this role now where you're largely considered as the legitimate leader of Georgia, and at the same time have no legal tools of the presidency?
Well, I would say very easily or quite easily, because de facto I'm the only legitimate president. There is no other legitimate or independent institution in Georgia. That's a fact. And very easily because, in fact, nothing has changed much for me. I didn't have any legal tools before, because it has been so restricted that practically I was left with nothing much but pardoning people, which is more of a responsibility than a power. It's a power, but it's one that is very heavy to carry. And granting decorations, and so that was the real tools. But the real one, the one that counted, is the capacity to be the voice, to protest certain things, and to represent the large part of the society that today has no other forms of expression, and to represent the country outside, which, whatever they try to do or want to do, they are not representing the country outside, because they're practically not recognized by anyone except by the countries that we have mentioned, Russia, Iran, and a few others, but none of the major European and not of the American partners. 3 months have gone by, nobody has recognized. That's a de facto non-recognition. Maybe the act will be voted upon or not. It's not that important, because what is important is the reality, and that reality allows me to continue to be representing the country. And as I said once, that's where I want to be supported in Georgia, and doing that work and not having to move outside of Georgia like
Right.
some that have to leave the country and be recognized afterwards as legitimate. So I think that the support I need from our partners is to continue dealing with me as the representative of the Georgian people, whether I have a building or not, but I have offices.
Yes. How, I'm sure this is the question on everybody's mind in the room as well as the audience. How do you see the future of these protest demonstrations going on, and how do you see it to be translated into some political action?
First of all, I see these protests going on. There is no sign that people are going to resign, and they have not left any way to go back to this population because of the repression, because of these people that are now receiving sentences that are very high, and because of the laws that they have adopted, which allow preventive detention or allow to sack people from the public service for political
Which has started
reasons,
already, yeah.
which has started, and in a country where there is no alternative. Maybe for a country like America, it's difficult to understand, but in Georgia, where you have more than 60% of people that work for the state or for local municipalities, and usually it's one person that feeds the whole family, it means that suddenly you find yourself without a job, without any compensation, without any trade unions that can support you for some time, and without any chance of finding a new job, because you cannot find a new public job, and the private sector, there are few jobs that are available for people from the public sector. They don't have usually the tools for that. So they have no much choice but to continue and to win. On the side of the protesters. On the side of the regime, they had, and they might have still today, some possibilities to accept the new elections, to negotiate the conditions with, could be the mediator, but they could negotiate directly with the parties and the civil society. And that would be the choice out that would guarantee more stability and allow the country not to suffer too much. Because otherwise the country is going to suffer. It's going to suffer from the sanctions because it will affect the economy. And they will not be saved by continuing because repression is never the way out. It's a way forward for a dictator to try always more repression, but there is no way out because the dissolution of the regime has started. One can see already that the business circle that is around is showing nervousness after the sanctions imposed on Ivanishvili, who has shares in almost every business in Georgia. So that means that they can all be related to him. The law enforcement structures have also shown some few, but some defections. And it's seen and known that the police, for instance, is reacting not positively to the fact that the hierarchy has changed and they are not obeying to their minister and to the normal vertical, but they are obeying to a criminal vertical who has been also sanctioned. So it's not something that the regular police forces like very much. Of course, there is a parallel police force that is used for the repression and that is probably going to be beefed up with money or with recruitments, but that's not something that can ensure for the future very much stability. So the fate then is the dissolution of the regime, which might take time, or which might happen tomorrow morning.
Yeah. So
That's how it happens with those type. And Georgia is, and that's the last thing, Georgia is a small country. So isolation for Georgia and sanctions for Georgia, it's not something that can be resisted in the same way as, for instance, Iran or Russia, which are big countries, big resources, and can close down for some years or some. That's not the case for Georgia. It will. Our finances, our economy will not. Tourism has already suffered quite seriously, and.
Let me briefly come back to the elections, new elections, you said. How realistic do you think that is?
There is no other way.
To convince the Georgian Dream to
No,
come to the negotiating
I'm saying that
table?
I think time is passing, and I think less and less prospects for them to be convinced that they have to do it. But then the alternative is regime dissolution and new elections.
Okay, I see. Let's talk about some of the violent crackdown, both on of the demonstrators as well as some other activists. We saw a violent attack on the former Prime Minister Gacharia and a journalist at the same place by the Georgian Dream member of parliament. We also, and not to even go back and talk about some of the crackdowns during the protest demonstrations, there were some instances of torture as well. So what do you make of that? It's all of a sudden Georgia sort of, at least the Georgian Dream is showing this tendency to display violence that we have not seen in Georgia for the past decade.
No, it's Russia. It's typical of the Russian methods. As we had the Russian law, as we have Russian rhetoric, we also have Russian type repression. And this Russian type repression, today, it's changing over time. And today, it's trying to diffuse in the population the idea that you cannot be safe anywhere. You cannot be safe if you go to Dubai for your vacation. You cannot be safe in the Sheraton Hotel in Batumi for the Prime Minister. You cannot be safe in your house in the evening because you can find in front of your house some of these black men. Right. And so it's trying to really diffuse terror in the people that are protesting. We know you, we have identified you, and you're not safe anywhere. That's what they're trying to project, and that's Putin methodology.
Mm-hmm. And please, if you have any questions, being prompted that we're ready for the questions. But just give me 1 second before we get to that. I have to ask you about the media in Georgia. And right now there is there are many conversations, or there is basically a crisis about particularly one of the journalists or media editors that's behind the bars. The way she was charged, she could be facing up to 7 years in prison.
Yeah, that's the sentencing is crazy.
Well,
it could have been administrative charges.
Right.
But they're not using administrative charges in most cases. It's an attempt to intimidate the rest of the population. They won't be able to intimidate her.
Right.
She's very strong. But it's an attempt to intimidate the others, saying that's what's going to happen, that's what's happening. It's the same for this very famous actor, right. Who is very well known by the whole society and very popular. And to say to the society, well, we can do that to him and charge him with 9 years, which is what he could be risking, means it can happen to any of you. Nobody is protected, even if people are well known, have popularity or things. It can happen.
Do you think that will work? Do you think that could?
It doesn't seem to be working. There is no one that has said, and today, I think today or tomorrow, there is a massive demonstration of the theaters and of the artists of the country. Each time, I mean, that's the problem with repression, frankly. If you don't break the people, and I don't think that Georgia is breakable, then you get more reaction, resistance, and you fuel, in fact, the protest movement, and
Yes,
that's what we are seeing.
That's been the case, very visible in Georgia. So please, let's start with the questions.
My name is Michael Washura. I'm with The Insider. In December, we published a statistical analysis that estimated Georgian Dream's real level of support in the elections was between 39 and 46%. I don't know if you agree with that estimate or not, but how far does that level of support actually need to fall before the repressive tools that you describe are no longer effective? Of course, Georgian Dream uses propaganda, repression, electoral manipulation, but how far does their actual level need to decline to before these tools cease to be effective?
Thank you.
If I had the answer, I don't know. First, on the figures, it's always very difficult in Georgia to assess the real figures because of what I described of the public service and the links of the people with the jobs, the municipalities, the local institutions. So people are very reluctant to risk any of their job to say, I am going to do this or that. So I would have said that before the elections, the real support was probably somewhere around 30 or 35%. But we cannot discuss that. It doesn't. It has certainly dropped with the repression. It has massively dropped with the statement of the Prime Minister to say that Georgia was leaving its European path. That is something that there are no pro-Russian Georgians, except maybe some in the current leadership. I'm not even sure of that. No. I think that for whatever reasons, they have to take this course, but I'm not sure that inside they have this pro-Russian ambition for Georgia. Yeah. So the statement of the Prime Minister is something that has cost them, I don't know how much, and the repression, as you describe, because it's so not in the Georgian culture, which is more of tolerance, and to have this brutal, violent beating of young people that obviously are not in the violent format themselves is something that also doesn't sit well with the Georgian culture.
Could I call you for the second question?
Zviad Skutaridze, I do international business consultancy. First of all, congratulations with achieving the great breakthrough on the international plane, starting with the meetings with the Macron and Trump, and going to with the United States, so that you are the only Georgian, the president of Georgia, who attended the inauguration, which is really important. And of course, it's a great achievement of you and the Georgian people, first of all, who are protesting, and this protest is continuous.
And of Congressman Wilson,
yes.
I have to note.
Yes. So my questions, I have two questions, two questions. So the first one is, what's your plan regarding the internal politics? So as you know, so the political parties, they are not like, they cannot find the mutual ground, so they cannot unite. And so this protest, which is continuous, it's almost like 2 months that it's like people.
Please be brief.
Yeah, precise. Okay,
yes,
so what's your plan in terms of the the unifying the opposition? That's the first one. The second one regarding the business, which is really important. So the business, I mean, only 10% of the whole business, I mean, in terms of the gross domestic product, what they represent, they signed the the protest memorandum, but the rest, and especially the large businesses who actually create the background and the system stands on, they are still there. So what's your strategy in terms of the communicating with them and kind of the breaking this background for the regime? Thank you.
Thank you very much. And Madam President, if I could also combine a question that's very relevant to your first question, is the Georgian Charter has been is remaining as symbolic yet just very important yet symbolic document at this point. How do you see the future of it? So maybe that's in a combination with the unity of the opposition.
Well, it's a symbolic document because the parties that had signed it didn't win the elections or that were rigged. But this is a document for the future. It's exactly what, after new elections, the parties that will come in power will have to do to rescind all these laws, the Russian laws, different Russian laws. There is not only one, there are many, less known, but not less negative for Georgia, like, for instance, the offshore law, which is very problematic for the relations with our economic partners. Many points, and the reform of the justice system and introduction of vetting formats, as was the case in some other countries of Central Eastern Europe. So the examples are there. Everything that was written in the charter, including the technical government, is probably and will probably be very actual once the elections come closer to us. And now the question on the parties, first of all, it has to be answered by parties. I'm working with them again to unite them on the conditions of the elections, which have to be set in advance. We shouldn't wait for the last moment to know what we are doing. And there are things to be done in order to ensure that the next elections are not held in the same way and are really free and fair. And especially, I think that one of the key elements is the diaspora, and allowing the diaspora to vote freely, massively, as it should be the case, because those people are very involved in Georgian economy. And so they should be very involved in Georgian politics also.
Yeah. Do you have a response to the business?
The business, I think first of all that what has happened with the business, the petitions that were signed, yes, it's not 100% and far from that, but it's something extremely new in Georgia. It has never been the case that business started to detach itself from the ruling party and the ruling leadership. For the others, as I said, there are very interesting signs of trying to reach out and trying to see what can happen, because they are very concerned and they know very well, those big businesses know very well what it means to be sanctioned. They don't have to have any explanations. So I think that there should be a policy to be designed by those that implement the sanctions. Probably some negotiations could be held because the sanctions are interesting as much as they are pressure. Once they're sanctioned, it's no longer pressure, it's a consolidation of the group that... so I think that there is some room for some flexible leverages.
Could I take two questions at a time? We're running out of time, if you don't mind, please.
Hi everyone, Tamara Chikhradze. I'm a member of a diaspora group, GeoVoice USA, although I'm asking this question as a Georgian citizen living in the US. First of all, thank you, President Zourabichvili. Thank you for your courage and resilience and for continuing to lead the country and its external relations. My question is about the lobby here in the US. It's great to see the strong relationships you have established for Georgia in the Senate and in Congress, in the administration. However, I don't think it will come as a surprise that the Georgian Dream will also deploy lobby, especially against sanctions. And in a true Russian playbook style, they will probably infiltrate the diaspora, the Congress. I mean, they may even be in this room. So what would be your message to this lobbyist who will try to lobby against the sanctions and against Georgian Dream?
Well, I don't have a message to the lobbyists because the lobbyists are usually paid, so they listen to those that pay. But I don't think that Georgian Dream is very good with lobbyists, and they're not very effective. And the proof of that is that without any lobbying, I'm here, and with lobbying, they're not here.
Nina Japaridze, President of the American Friends of Georgia, welcome back to Washington. And two very quick questions. I have a very dear friend who's from El Salvador, lives in the United States, and when I heard him say how many different ways the El Salvadorian community has an opportunity to vote during their country's elections, that list included all progressive, modern ways of voting. Is it possible to please take advantage of your presence here and hold conversations, or at another point, with all the players who could help our communities truly have all those tools, including real e-voting? So I'm talking about Microsoft and others who have collaborated with Estonia, Ukraine. That's question number one. Can we be imaginative and use all the tools, not just expanding voting locations? And the second question is, given the political climate that we are witnessing here, and even yesterday's executive order, which is halting all foreign aid, given the opportunities you still have to converse on U.S.-Georgia strategic partnership, is it please also possible to emphasize with Marco Rubio, if you have an opportunity to meet him, or the senators, the need to really not throw the baby out with the bathwater and prioritize key communities like human rights defenders, media, civil society. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Nina. Laura, would you?
I won't remember all
because we only have 2 minutes left, and that's why, because you've been standing there for some.
Thank you very much, President Zourabichvili. It was an honor to listen to you today. Laura Linderman from American Foreign Policy Council in the Atlantic Council. I just wanted to say, so we have a new Trump administration here. You touched on the importance of the non-recognition policy in Europe and here, and you also touched on the influence of sanctions in a small country. If you could wave a magic wand and get the Trump administration to do the best possible actions for Georgia in their next executive order, what would you ask for?
Well, I don't know exactly what the executive orders can cover or not, so I'm not the best. But I think that what would be very effective is for President Trump just to say that elections in Georgia were rigged, that this is not acceptable, and that new elections have to take place. That doesn't need an executive order, I think.
Yeah.
For the question on the elections, yes, we're thinking about this, the way electronic voting and distance voting can be used. The problem there is that it takes more than me meeting with Microsoft. I think the diaspora can be very useful doing this job because you're here, and certainly Smartmatic has to be met to see how what happened can be corrected securely, because they have a reputational problem. So they can work with us to solve this reputational problem and secure the next elections, and distant voting for the diaspora. But we have to know whether that's feasible in time, because I don't think that the next elections will happen in many months. So we have to have also short-term solutions. And for the future, yes, we should move, certainly as a country that has a large diaspora, that today exceeds 1 million people. For 1 out of 4 is outside of the country. So we need to have effective measures to allow the participation of the diaspora, not only in voting. I have been from the very first days in favor of having representation of the diaspora in the parliament. I think it happens for many countries, and we need to also move in that direction.
We've gone over the allowed time by 39 seconds, but I do have 2 more questions from the audience. I apologize. I don't think I can get to you, unless it's very, very quick.
Yeah. I know we are limited in time. So very quickly, Madam President, first of all, thank you very much, and congratulations to your very successful visit. First question, civil society and the Western support perhaps are the last pillars of democratic resilience in Georgia. So unless the civil resilience is translated into some organized institutional political processes, I think we cannot really go far with this. So I wonder, what is your role in this, and what are your plans in consolidating the political resilience also in Georgia? And the second, very brief note, we have information that there is a planned IMF visit in Georgia, and also the possibility for revision of the IMF program in the country. So if you have heard about this, and if there is anything at your hand that you could do to address this process, because we believe that it will be detrimental right now for this delegation to take place in the country where we have not the government but the regime in place. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And to add to those two questions, and we need to wrap this up, I need to ask you some questions that are coming online. Are you planning to create your own political party, one? And two, what do you think the US or the West can do to decrease Russian influence in Georgia? So those 4 questions, take them as you wish.
So, what was the first? I don't remember
the first,
now.
NGO sector and civil society.
Yeah, civil society. I think it's very important that the civil society really receives what is announced by our European partners. I've not heard what will be the policy of the new administration in that sense, but probably will be the same, saying that we are not giving to the government programs, we will give to the civil society. It's nicely said, but it has to be done. And it has to be done in ways that secure that those that have been leading the protests today are really those that receive this support. Media has to be supported, local media, and we see through the importance of preserving the local media, regional media, and trade unions. Mm-hmm. We do not have trade unions. We have Soviet trade unions still in Georgia, which are corrupted and do not serve any purpose. And that is very important for people to be able then to sustain their protest strikes and so on. For the IMF, I've been asking to meet with the director of IMF. I don't know whether we get any success yet, but we need to see them, and I think that, as it was the case with some visits, the Council of Europe will manage to diffuse their negative parts, and they can come and see what is happening in the country. But I don't think that their position on the country's finances will be very positive.
Russian influence in your own party?
My own party, I think I'm more useful for the country today in the role that I have, because there is nobody else to carry this role. If I become just one more political party leader, I don't think that I can continue to be the voice of the country. If at one point in time it's needed, then
you're not excluding that.
I'm not excluding anything anymore. And there was
Russian influence.
Russian influence.
What would you like the West to do more?
I think that we need 2 things. One is certainly to concentrate efforts on cyber attacks, hybrid forms, and especially elections. Because what has happened in Georgia should be studied well by all the other countries, and should be studied also to see how elections have to be observed in the future. The old forms of observing elections are not working anymore because they do not reflect the sophistication of the new methods that are used. And I think that it's a problem that is not only for Georgia, where it has been tasted, but it's for many other, especially European countries. The United States less sensible to this because of the dimension, but for small countries, Moldova is next, Romania is next, and it's a very important issue.
It's a very important point that you just made. Well, thank you very much. Thank you, to the audience. Thank you for your questions. Thank you again for organizing this. And good luck to you, Madam President. Yes.